Thanks for sticking around. Today, I'm here to talk about the cuisine of the Lowcountry. The Lowcountry is basically the coastal communities from South Carolina to Georgia. And that's where we work, and that's where we cook. We cook at a restaurant called McCrady's. And this is a picture of McCrady's in 1978. McCrady's was actually built in 1788. McCrady's was built by a gentleman named Edward McCrady, and it was a tavern. And at that time, McCrady's was a big political hangout. So we're right around the Revolutionary War, so there was lots of discussions going on there over a couple beers. And it's really neat to be able to do that today, to keep that tradition going. This is what it looks like now. That's the outside. Charleston has so much history. If you think about American cuisine and what that means, we're really, really lucky because we have a lot to pull inspiration from. Charleston was founded as a city in 1670, but I did some research and got some information all the way back to 1521 when the Native Americans were there, and really researched their cuisine and what they were cooking and the ingredients they were cooking with upon first contact. There's a gentleman named Glenn Roberts, and he has a company called Anson Mills. And in 1998, he sold everything that he owned, and he bought this little shack behind a car wash in Columbia, South Carolina. And he bought 4 native mills and 40 chest freezers. And his goal was to research and find these old ingredients from the Antebellum period. Things like heirloom corn for grits, things like Carolina gold rice, things like the old Antebellum wheat used for the wonderful biscuits. And he's really been an incredible inspiration for me. He has single-handedly brought back Lowcountry cuisine. So today, we're going to take 3 dishes and go through each one, 3 iconic Southern dishes, the first one being shrimp and grits, the second one being jardin potager, and the third one being Hoppin John. And all those ingredients came from Glenn and a little bit of our seed-saving program. This thing's not working right. There's a picture of my pig. Can we start this from the beginning, please? And it needs to be on manual. It's not on manual. All right, enjoy the show. So shrimp and grits, it's very interesting to research it because a lot of people think they really know about shrimp and grits. Well, shrimp and grits goes all the way back to the Native Americans. They grew an old corn, an old heirloom corn that could be shade grown. So they could plant it in the spring and harvest it in the winter. And what they would do is the corn would grow and dry on the stalk, and then it would fall down and it would snow. And so this dried corn on the kernel would be preserved. So it was almost like a freezer. So that's what inspired Glenn, reading about that and learning about that. So he found that the secret to grits was in the grinding and it being very, very, very cold when they were ground. And so if you go to Glenn's shop, there's 40 to 50 chest freezers full of these precious, rare seeds that you can call and he'll grind for you right there. So I started thinking about that, and and the importance of that. And I wanted to grow my own grits. For the last couple of years, we're lucky enough to have been able to grow our own food on a farm on Guatemala Island. And Guatemala Island is this really beautiful area outside of Charleston that was founded in 1666, and it's been under a Conservation Act, so it's untouched. It's absolutely beautiful. It's basically farmland, so there's lots of history there. So for 2 years, without a farmer and without any experience, I grew food for the restaurant. And I was speaking with Glenn, and I said, I want to do something important. I want to do something significant. I want to be able to bring back a variety of corn that's almost extinct. I think that would be a great thing to add to our list of accomplishments. So a week later, Glenn called me and he said, I've got it. I found this old moonshiner's corn called Jimmy Red. And so Glenn gave me a handful of it. We planted it, we grew it, we dried it. We all sat in the kitchen and popped each individual kernel off. And it was really, really wonderful. So I had some VIPs in, and I wanted to cook shrimp and grits using our corn that we just harvested. Well, we didn't have a mill, so that's when I decided that the ultimate cold milling would be liquid nitrogen. So basically, that brings us to our first dish. What we're going to do is grind this in the VitaPrep. And the reason that you want to cold mill grits is because if the mill is hot, then that's going to dissipate the flavor. And so by grinding these with the liquid nitrogen, we're able to really preserve that wonderful corn flavor. The first time we cooked these, it was really, really incredible. Grits take about 3 or 4 hours to cook. And the first bite I got of these grits was so incredible. There was no dairy in the pot. It tasted like hot cornbread straight out of the oven with butter on it. It was the most delicious thing. And so when we were coming up with the shrimp and grits dish, we are also going to grind the shrimp so that it takes on the same texture as the grits. And so the Native Americans would do this almost in a mortar and pestle. And that's kind of where shrimp and grits was born from. They were able to carry this in their pocket while they were hunting, and they would trap some shrimp. They would take that corn, grind it into a paste, cook it, and that was the shrimp and grits, because they would grow their corn once a year, and they would have to preserve it. There were 2 forms of preservation that the Native Americans used. The first, which I think is really, really interesting, is smoking it. So what that means is they built these pine smoke shacks, and they would smoke the corn still in the cob. So if you think about it, when we first tasted grits, or they called it gruel, the first grits that were tasted were pine and smoke flavored. So we're going to produce that today by smoking the grits. We've taken a little bit of pine essential oil and put it into the grits to really recreate that experience. So what you have is freshly milled nitro grits, essentially. So these things are so cold that the flavor is going to be so strong and so wonderful. And I think that's a great example of using technology to update old dishes. This corn makes incredible moonshine. Not that I would know about moonshine, but you have a blender top, please. So for the shrimp, we're going to do the same thing. We're actually going to grind it into the same texture as the grits. These shrimp are from Charleston. These are brown shrimp. We have wonderful, wonderful shrimp there. People are very, very passionate about shrimp in Charleston. People ride around with bumper stickers that say, "Friends don't let friends eat imported shrimp." And this is a great technique to use for all kinds of proteins, especially raw fish. So what's going to happen is the shrimp's going to take on the same texture as the grits, and we're going to fold that into the cooked shrimp. So the end product is very unique texturally. So your shrimp are really, really cold and really ground up nicely. And those are going to go right into the grits. We like to garnish this dish also with a beautiful poached shrimp, just for a reference point. So what we do is we take the shrimp and we place it into the CVAP at 80 degrees Celsius, 40% humidity. For about 5 to 7 minutes.
Chef, for those of us like myself who aren't super familiar with the CVAP, could you just talk to us about it for a second or two?
We love CVAP. We have 4 different CVAPs at the restaurant that we use nonstop. They really make our lives very easy for service. We do everything in them: stock making, dehydrating, cooking proteins. Fish is absolutely incredible. Cooked in the CVAP, it's so gentle. We're going to garnish the shrimp and grits with some puffed shrimp for texture. And this is a very simple technique where you take shrimp, puree it with tapioca flour. We put it into a Cryovac bag, seal that bag up, roll it very thin, and then we put it in the CVAP for about half an hour. It's pretty close, equal parts shrimp to tapioca flour. And then we dehydrate it, and what you're left with is this crispy shrimp that you should be able to break it like that. It should snap. And then we just flash fry it. We're also going to garnish the shrimp and grits with a sauce blanket made from shrimp consomme and several herbs and flowers. In the 1600s, there was a lot of foraging going on, a lot of foraging of wild herbs. And that was a big part of the cuisine. Let's smoke those grits. Cool. So this is going to give the shrimp that smoke flavor from the preservation techniques of the Native Americans. The other technique that they would use is they would bury the corn underground, and that would allow them to preserve that corn for literally 5 years. I think that's pretty amazing. So we'll let that smoke a little bit. You could also smoke the grits after you grind them and then cook them, but I find that smoking them a la minute gives a much better flavor. While those grits are cooking, I wanted to talk a little bit about our farming project. For a couple years, I did everything by myself, which was an absolutely stupid idea. It seemed like a great idea at the time, but it's an incredible, incredible amount of work. So recently, we've been lucky enough to form a relationship with a lady named Maria Baldwin. And she is an incredible farmer in McClellanville, South Carolina, which is a great shrimping town in South Carolina. We have chickens that provide us with eggs and also fertilization. We have a new project where we have a 4-acre plot that we're going to dedicate solely to vegetables that were around pre-Civil War, the Antebellum period of Charleston. So we're very lucky to be able to do that. We're going to focus on these wonderful grains and things that Anson Mills has already paved the way for. Let's plate that. So now the shrimp has just firmed up and it's taken on the texture of the grits, and it's just such a nice texture, and it really makes the grits so meaty and delicious.
Actually, Chef, yesterday when you were doing this dish in the workshop, someone walked in and didn't see the first part of it, and they were eating the grits, and they were like, "These are the meatiest grits I've ever had. They're so meaty." And they didn't know that there was actually all the ground up shrimp in there.
So the sauce blanket goes on top, and I think that really just reinforces that shrimp flavor, because we're really trying to just serve shrimp and grits. So the shrimp is beautifully, beautifully poached in the CVAP. We're going to garnish that with a little bit of aerated shrimp consomme and several beautiful herbs. So we've just taken that shrimp consomme and hit it with the hand blender a little bit. Again, just amplifying, multiplying the flavor of the shrimp. This is wood sorrel, and wood sorrel grows all over our farm. We can pick baskets and baskets of it every day if we wanted to, and it really adds a nice acidity to the dish. These are arugula blossoms that we allow the arugula to go to seed. These are garlic flowers, the same idea. That's the dish. So the next dish is really exciting for us because it's a brand new discovery. When I started thinking about what to do for this presentation and speaking with Glenn, I asked him if he had the opportunity to speak here, what would he talk about? And he said to me that the missing link to Lowcountry Cuisine right now is Benny. And Benny is essentially sesame, but not how you think of sesame, the sesame that's available today. This was harvested last week along the Ace Basin of the Lowcountry, and this is the first crop of the original West African Benny that's been harvested in over 100 years. This is pretty much a large amount of the seed stock. Now, the difference is the amount of oil. The sesame that we're used to today is a very high oil sesame. It has approximately 60 to 70% oil content, whereas this old Sea Island Benny has about a 40%. And so a lot of the old dishes use Benny, but it's been very difficult for us to cook these old dishes because the Benny that's available now, it has such a high oil concentration that it's almost insipid. It's very hard to use. So I researched several old books from the 1700s and found that this was a very, very, very important part of Lowcountry cooking, and also agriculture. This is a very important part of symbiotic crop rotations with cowpeas. You can't have good cowpeas unless you've planted Benny before that. And the same goes with rice. This was a great source of protein. It has about 25 to 30% available protein, and also a great source of fat for cooking. And so I started thinking about what would be the best dish to showcase Benny, and I discovered during the 1700s in Charleston, there was something called jardin potager, and there were these carts that would go up and down East Bay Street, actually where our restaurant is today. And the more I thought about it, I began to realize that it was the beginning of farmers markets. It was the beginning of street vending. These carts would have all of the vegetables from the garden. You could buy Benny paste. You could buy fresh Benny. And so the dish jardin potager became very popular. So we're going to do our version of that today by using an old technique where they would take the leftover liquid from the Carolina Gold rice when they cooked it. They would cook the rice almost like pasta, large pots of water, throw the rice in, let it float around, and so they were left with this rice stock. And so what they would do is they would take this Benny and heavily toast it, infuse that into the rice stock, and you get this beautiful, beautiful stock. This stuff has incredible minerality. It's very floral. It's very nutty. It has a really, really beautiful flavor. So what we've done is we've taken as many beautiful baby vegetables that we could find. We braised them all separately so that their flavor stays separate. You can pick apart each individual flavor. And we're going to bring back that old jardin potager dish. So basically what he's doing here, we have the braising liquid from each vegetable, just a tiny bit of sugar, a little bit of butter. This dish is a lot of fun to pick up on a Saturday night. Can you froth the rice broth, please? So we've taken that sesame, heavily toasted it, added it to the broth. We're going to froth it up a little bit. I'll take those potatoes. And also bring over the garnish, please. These are incredible potatoes. These potatoes are grown on Wadmalaw Island. They're called Nicola potatoes. And they're very, very sweet. We put them through the 3-stage cooking process so that we can puree them and add tons and tons of butter. We've gone through about 2,000 pounds of these potatoes this year. And for someone who has a farm, this is a really wonderful dish because it changes daily. So at the restaurant, you could have this tomorrow, come in a week later, and it would be totally different. So it's really capturing a specific day in the garden. It really reminds me of walking through the garden and tasting all the vegetables and the flavor in my mouth on the drive home back to the restaurant. I can taste all these different vegetables. So this dish really captures that experience. We're very lucky in Charleston. We have about 10 months of growing. So what that means is we have 2 tomato seasons. We're able to grow tomatoes through New Year's Eve. We start our tomatoes in the greenhouse in January. And that may sound crazy to a lot of people who has experience in farming. And so we have our cooked vegetables, and we're very, very lucky. We have a botanist on our staff at the farm who has incredible knowledge in herbs and flowers, and we're very, very spoiled. We get these beautiful, beautiful deliveries of plants in all different stages of their maturity. This rice broth is really, really insane. It has such wonderful, wonderful flavor. It's kind of fun to think about bringing a dish back that pretty much disappeared. And it really opens up a lot of doors for us having this Benny again to be able to play with and begin to bring back a lot of these old antebellum dishes that were so important to the cuisine of Charleston for so long. And for this dish, I like to put lots of different raw and cooked vegetables as well. So these are raw baby white asparagus tips, the first shoots that appear. And that's the dish. So the last dish may be the most important one. All throughout the 1700s, Charleston was a rice town. Rice came to Charleston in the 1600s from a gentleman whose ship had broken down, and he was in Charleston trying to get it fixed. And he didn't have any money. But he had this rice seed from Madagascar. And that's what he traded to get his ship fixed. And so all throughout the 1700s, all of these rice plantations started to pop up. And the Carolina Gold Rice Kitchen was formed, that whole era of cooking in Charleston. Charleston was exporting rice all over the world. Charleston was exporting rice to Italy, to Asia. The French didn't want it until Thomas Jefferson convinced them. The dish that we're going to do is Hoppin John. And Hoppin John is a very interesting dish to research because it appears in all cultures. It really goes back to the 11th century. It came to Africa via Persia and from Africa to South Carolina. So we had all these rice plantations, and we had this beautiful rice, and so we needed all these other crops to provide crop rotation to the soil. And one of those things is a legume. And these peas also came from Africa. These are Sea Island red peas. These were a part of our seed saving project last year. They taught us everything we know about sustainable agriculture. These peas are so important. And these peas really are responsible for making me fall in love with seed saving, because once you hear the story of these peas and what they taught us, it's crazy to think about the fact that they could have become extinct. And once they're gone, they're gone. There's no lab that can regenerate these seeds. And so when they're gone, guess what? The story's gone. And so it's so important to know this, to know these stories, and to understand them, to have a true respect for cooking, especially something so close to a particular culture. Hoppin John has a couple different names. In the Gullah culture in South Carolina, it's called Reezy Peasy. And that came that came over because we had the Italians help us in the late 1600s, all the way through about 1760, help us learn how to grow this rice. And their dish of new crop rice is rice and peas, except they would use rice peas. Our rice peas were these wonderful cow peas. There are two forms of Hoppin John in Charleston. There's the Reezy Peasy, which is new crop Carolina Gold rice, and fresh Sea Island red peas. And we were lucky enough to harvest some fresh Sea Island red peas the day before we packed up and came to New York. So you'll be able to see the difference between the fresh and the dried. Now the dried, what we do is we allow them to dry on the plant. So you can see how much they shrink. So the original version of Hoppin John would have been the fresh peas thrown into the pot with the Carolina Gold rice and cooked, Reezy Peasy, and they would garnish that with foraged herbs, bay laurel, different things like that. And then Hoppin John, in my eyes, is the dried peas. And those are cooked in separate pots. You have your Carolina Gold cooking, and then you take your Sea Island red peas, and you make a Sea Island red pea gravy, and you just put it right on top. So those are the two forms of Hoppin John. So we wanted to make the dish interesting. I didn't really want to come here and cook a pot of rice and a pot of Sea Island red peas. So we're going to turn it into a dessert. So rice is really, really, really incredible. Creme de riz, or rice flour, is a really interesting, useful tool in the kitchen. It was always used as a thickener. They didn't have cornstarch. They didn't have different things to thicken. So we basically made horchata. And we began to heat it. And as you can see, it thickens up beautifully. Now, once you activate the rice starch and refrigerate it, it sets up like a beautiful gelatin. So that gave us a couple of ideas. We put it in the ISI canister and aerated it, cooled it slightly, put it into a ring mold, set it in the refrigerator, and we got this beautiful cloud of rice. What we're going to do today, we're going to take that same idea and drop it into some liquid nitrogen. Can you fill up the cooler with liquid nitrogen, please? The other canister? So for the red pea component of this dish, we made a very sweet puree, kind of like those gravies that would be poured over the top of the rice for Hoppin John. We also took the red peas and ground them into a flour, and that's one of the beautiful things about red peas is that they're so versatile. So we ground them into a flour, made a little crumble. We also took some of the rice, ground it into a flour, and toasted it in the pan. As we were toasting it, you could smell freshly popped popcorn. Really nutty, really aromatic. Pork fat also kind of found its way into the dish. And so we wanted to put that in the dessert. So we took some lard from our pigs, and we added some confectioner's sugar and some tapioca maltodextrin so we can get that nice pork flavor. So we took our Sea Island red pea puree and we aerated it in a jar. Which has been demoed many times this Congress. It's a really wonderful technique. We first started with the idea of just doing a gel, and it just seemed too dense and too heavy, so this allowed us to really lighten it up and change the texture a little bit. So now you can take that horchata that we added a little bit of egg to, so it's similar to an ice cream. And again, this dish was also garnished with wild foraged herbs as well. Some of the toasted rice just has such an incredible flavor. Some of the delicious sweetened pork fat. Some of our red pea flour. These are really nice coriander blooms. This is what happens when you let the cilantro go to seed. Really adds a wonderful, wonderful flavor. This is black mint. It has a very nice light mint flavor. This is some fern lavender. I love the flavor that the lavender adds. These are marshmallow flowers. And there's the Hoppin John.
All right.